when I first got into this business. I got into this business in the early days back in 2001. And what I noticed back then was, what was the problems that I was dealing with when people would talk to me? The problems that I was dealing with was, Danny, we got phishing attacks. People are phishing us. We've got viruses. We got hackers. So what are the problems that I'm dealing with today? Danny, we've got phishing attacks. We've got viruses. We've got hackers. It's all the same problems except a billion more. I don't think there's any other industry that seems to be losing that battle, right? Now, there's a few reasons for this, and I'm going to touch on them because I think that any education about security, it really starts with learning these reasons. Normally, I like to pull them down one at a time. I think we lost a bit of my animation, but just pretend that you're only seeing the first thing and pretend I pulled this down individually, okay? So let's talk about these 5 reasons, and this will be the building blocks for anything that you need. For those of you that are new to cybersecurity, once you hear what I say on this page, you'll be able to learn any part of cybersecurity. So let's talk about the first thing that makes this such a unique industry. The first thing is the very, very high human factor, much higher than virtually any other industry. So what do I mean by that? So humans are now what being attacked when hackers attack. What do? They don't attack networks. They don't attack infrastructure. They attack humans. They attack people. People are vulnerable. There's a saying in the industry that goes, how do you get somebody to open up a file no matter how corrupt? You label that file resume, and you send that to somebody in HR, and 9 times out of 10, they're going to open up that file, no matter how corrupt. And not only that, but in this day and age, it's never been easier to trick people because we put everything online. All of our information is out there on social media. It's so easy for somebody to Google our name, read something about us, and use that to trick us into doing something that we shouldn't do. This is a big problem. And you consider organizations, part of what they're trying to protect is the people. But the people are the biggest problem, okay? That's why, and that goes back to what John was talking about hygiene, right? Hygiene is such a big problem because the people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, okay? So let's talk about how the way we do business keeps changing. If I was to stand in front of you guys back even in the 90s, which I suppose was a while ago, but it really doesn't feel like a while ago, right? But if I was to stand in front of you guys in the 90s, and if I was to say to you guys, hey guys, please give me a couple minutes of your time, I want to talk to you about corporate security, you would think, oh, corporate security, he must be here to talk to us about security guards or video cameras or those TV monitors, okay? But as we change the way that we do business, we change the definition of corporate security. Corporate security didn't mean that anymore. All of a sudden, corporate security, we started calling it internet security, network security, data security. When we started doing so much business on the cloud, people started throwing terms around like cloud security. When we started doing so much business with mobile devices, we started calling it mobile security. And every time we change the way that we do business, we need to change the way that we think of security. This makes it very complicated for us. Nowadays, that data is everywhere, right? I think you're running out of names of what you can call this. I had a friend, no joke, he came to me and he goes, hey, how cool is this? I can access my email from my belt buckle, okay? I was sitting down, he's shoving it right in my face. I'm like, get the hell out of here. Why would anyone want that? I don't want to see that, right? But I thought, you imagine the damage that could be done if you can hack someone's belt buckle, right? We're getting into really weird territory, right? But we got to rethink that strategy. The government is involved. Sorry? I'll answer those questions after. So there you go. It's a belt buckle that you can access your email for everyone. Everyone's getting that belt buckle. So whether you want it or not, you all have to get it. So the government is involved. Prior to 2005, in Canada, how we chose to run our cybersecurity strategies, that was up to us. We did not have to worry about the government. There was no laws or regulations specific to this, okay? Then, all of a sudden, regulation came to town, and now we've got to take basic security fundamentals. They made them into regulation. In some cases, they've made them into law, and this is something that we have to worry about. And if we don't do this properly, we're going to get in big trouble, probably more so than any trouble the actual hacker can do for us. And I'm going to deep dive into that quite a bit more in a slide or two. What else? The evolution of crime. So we know that, hey, if our technology is evolving, we know the bad guys' technology is evolving, but I'm not even going to talk about that here. There's social engineering. That's evolving. Some of the tricks that these guys do, man, it's like out of an Ocean's 11 movie, right? You guys see those movies where they commit those crimes and they do those when they phone people and they're lying to them and it's so convincing, right? But I'm not even going to talk about that here. I'm just going to talk about the evolution of the motivation behind the crime itself, okay? Back in 2001, when I first started, anytime somebody would call me out and anytime they'd say, okay, Danny, can you help me out here? And I would ask them, what are your concerns? They would always say, I'm afraid someone's going to type, hack into my website and type, this site's no good, or something along those lines. They're going to vandalize my site. They're going to do it in such a way that is their symbol. Then they're going to brag about it to their hacker buddies, just like vandalizing a wall. They're going to tag the wall, and they're going to say, look what I did, right? That's what these guys were doing back then. It was vandalism. Okay? They did it as part-time jobs. These guys did have jobs. They'd go to other places. They'd go to work. Then they'd go home. They'd go to their mother's basements, and they'd say, you know what, I'm going to vandalize a couple of sites, and then I'm going to laugh about it. But then all of a sudden they realized, you know what, I can actually make money. I can actually do some stuff that's going to pay me well. They got involved with organized crime. All of a sudden, other countries started thinking, we could use this as some sort of either terrorism or some sort of act of war, some sort of an attack. And when the motivation changes from something like vandalism to all of a sudden, yeah, let's make a lot of money, or let's go to war, or let's do an act of terrorism, everything else will evolve. It all starts with the motivation, okay? And now, these guys don't have part-time jobs. This is what they do. This is their job. Their job is to take us down. And the last thing that I want to touch on is the skills gap. The skills gap, this is something that is very near and dear to my heart. I say that because, so there are a lot of statistics about the cybersecurity skills gap. If you Google that, if you Google cybersecurity skills gap, it is everywhere. But before I ever read it as a statistic, I felt it in the industry. It was back in 2009. I didn't read a single stat about this, and I was running a team, and I had a position available on my team, and I got the approval for that headcount. And I'm like, okay, great. And coincidentally, I actually had two friends of mine that I trusted that were in the industry, and they were both out of work at the time. And I didn't care that somebody else didn't want them. I knew I wanted them, at least one of them, and I knew I trusted them. I knew they were good. So I'm like, this is awesome. For one time in my life, I got an advantage, right? For a guy who grew up wearing his sister's clothes, I actually have a spot, and I'm in the power position. I got two friends that are looking. So I called them both in separately. And I start asking them, okay, so listen, let's do this. And they start asking me some tough questions, like, Danny, what can you do for us? Tell me, why would I want to come work for you? And I'm like, because you're unemployed and I'm offering you a job. Like, I don't understand. Like, why does it feel like I'm on the losing end of this? And they're like, yeah, Danny, we're not worried about being unemployed. Separately, they're telling me this, right? And I'm like, how are you not worried about this? They're like, because we're cybersecurity. They're like, I got like 10 people knocking on my door like every hour, right? And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, they must be bluffing. They must just be really tough. They're going to use this as a negotiation tactic. They weren't bluffing. Neither of them took my job, okay? And then when I'm speaking with the headhunter, every resume she gives me, they don't have cybersecurity skills on the resume. I'm like, what the hell? Get me some cybersecurity. I don't understand. Like, this is a cybersecurity position. Why can't you find? And they're like, there are no people. They're like, there are so many jobs out there. And this is in 2009. And I was like, are you kidding me? There are that many more jobs, and there are qualified people to fill them. So I started talking to friends of mine that were in similar positions. I would ask them, and all of them were like, yeah, this is a problem. And it wasn't until 2013 that I actually read the first stat about it. And they're like, there are 25% more jobs than there are people to fill them in this industry. Then in 2014, I think it went up to 30%, and it kept going up. It kept jumping up. I think one year, I think it might have went up by 5 or 10%, it kept jumping up. Now they're predicting basically by 2019 or 2020, there's like literally going to be nobody to work this industry, okay? So what are companies going to do about that? Outsourcing is certainly an option, right? But it's scary. This is scary, and if it's something that we're not feeling yet, if there's anyone here that hasn't felt it yet, give it 2 years, and this is going to be something that's going to be a big deal. Now, mind you, on a positive note, if there is anyone that knows somebody young that's looking for work, that's saying, I don't know what to do with my life, tell them to go into cybersecurity. Holy cow. You'll have no shortage of jobs, and you'll never run out of work, and you get to fight bad guys, right? So I always preach that whenever I'm in a school. I always say, like, what are you possibly studying right now if you're not studying this? Like, this is going to be the next big thing. You'll have your pick of jobs. So there's some positivity here, okay? Now, this really is what makes this industry so complicated. And this is also why we've seen an evolution from how we strategize about cybersecurity. And what I mean by that is, in the most simplest of terms, if I was to talk about a cybersecurity strategy, I could explain it in 3 words. We want to prevent, we want to detect, and we want to respond. Back in the day, when I first started, it was really all about prevent. I want to prevent this attack from happening. I'm going to do what I can to prevent it from happening. But as the years went on, and as the stories came out, we started realizing that's wishful thinking. I really need to be ready to detect this. And then, of course, I really need to be ready to respond. And what's interesting is when I break down what's happening with PIPA, you'll see that PIPA only has to do, the PIPA changes that were effective as of this past November 1st, they only have to do with how you respond. There is no changes that have been made to PIPA that have anything with the security measures that you need to put in place to prevent or even detect. It only talks about how you respond. So what do I take from that? I take from that, wow, our government is saying to us, I'm not even going to ask you to try to protect yourself. I'm just going to assume you're going to get hacked, and I need to know how you plan to respond, okay? This is the world that we're living in. So let's get into that. So what is PIPA? Well, PIPA was created in January 1st, 2004. And essentially what it is it is the Personal Information Protection Electronics Document Act. And what it was created to help Canada compete on a global scale. As the world started becoming digital, Canada realized, hey, listen, we got to come together. We got to put some sort of governance around this so we can compete digitally on a global scale, right? Now, there's really 2 definitions, and let's read it together that I want to read about PIPA. So the one definition is PIPA is a Canadian law relating to data privacy. It governs how private sector organizations collect, use, and disclose personal information in the course of commercial business. Specifically, any particular transaction, act, or conduct, or any regular course of conduct that is of a commercial character, including the selling, bartering, or leasing of donor, membership, or other fundraising lists. Okay? Now, in June of 2015, there was a bunch of updates, amendments to this law that were passed, and those amendments came into place on November 1st. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, okay? So essentially what we are talking about here is we are talking about mandatory notification, reporting, and record keeping of privacy breaches under Canada's federal data protection law. This is what came into place on November 1st of this year. Now, what I want to talk about is there may be some of you in this room that are here or want to know about this because this is applicable to what it is you need to do, what it is you need to do for your business, for your career. There are some of you here that it might not be your responsibility per se, but maybe you need to be aware of this so you can explain this to someone whose responsibility it is, okay? Whatever boat you fall in, I want you to pay attention as to how I'm going to break this out for you. Because when I first came across the document and when I first came across the changes to the law, it was quite complicated, okay? And I remember looking at this thing thinking, man, I'm just gonna do it all in an all-nighter. I'm gonna crack a Red Bull, I'm gonna go through this whole thing, and I'm just gonna barrel through it, right? But I realized, when the government is writing something or they're putting something, they don't have anything that they need to sell, right? So they're gonna write it in the way that they know it. But after I came through, I realized, you know what? It looks more intimidating than it is. It really only breaks out into 5 pieces, okay? And the 5 pieces are, we're talking about details on record keeping in relation to breaches. We are talking about who needs to be notified of the breach, what breaches require notification, when notification needs to happen, and how the notification needs to be delivered. Now, these things are going to have some serious consequences relating to them if not done properly. So I encourage you, for those of you, again, that need to do this for your business, take a look at how I'm going to break this down. I'm going to break it down by one of those points at a time, okay? And for anyone that needs to discuss this, get your hands on this PowerPoint and use this very PowerPoint. Talk to whoever it is that you need to talk to in this same way. So let's break it down. Let's do it. So who to notify? Essentially, this really boils down into 2 buckets. There's the affected individuals, which I'll get into more in just a bit. And then, of course, there's the privacy commissioner. Who's the privacy commissioner? The current privacy commissioner is Daniel Theron. He was appointed on June 5th, 2014. The Privacy Commissioner of Canada reports to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy, and Ethics. I'm hoping that nobody in this room has to deal with Daniel because that would not be a good day. He's a nice guy, but you don't want to have to be calling him or you don't want to have to be reaching out to him, okay? So let's talk about what to notify on. So essentially, PIPA will require organizations to notify individuals and report to the commissioner all breaches where it is reasonable to believe that the breach creates a real risk of significant harm to the individual. Okay? So naturally, you might be thinking, okay, well, what does that mean? What is significant harm? What is real risk? So let's start with significant harm. Significant harm essentially includes, among other harms, humiliation, damage to reputation or relationships, and identity theft. And real risk, what we're talking about here is we're talking about consideration of the sensitivity of the information, the probability of misuse, and any other prescribed factors. So let me tell you what you might do with this, okay? So let's say I have some sort of website where I'm collecting information on a personal nature, and as a result of me collecting this information, I'm also collecting something to do with health information from people. And let's say that information gets breached, okay? Now, health information sells for 10 times more than credit card information on the dark web. Why? Because once you know your credit card information has been hacked, it's very easy to cancel. Healthcare information, not so much. Hackers love healthcare information. So, if my site gets breached and my client's healthcare information gets taken, the probability of misuse in that case would be very high. We know that to be very popular, okay? Now, what can somebody do with that? Well, they're going to sell it on the dark web for the purposes of identity theft. So that's one, you know, something like that, that'll very easily fit into both those buckets, and you know, yeah, okay, this falls into that. I've got a problem here, okay? No additional factors have been prescribed in the proposed regulations, although the commissioner will be publishing guidance in respect of this issue. This is something that I'm on top of. As soon as I get anything new, I will make sure that anyone that I've worked with finds out about what the changes are. So what that means is, let's say you get a breach and you think it doesn't necessarily fit. You're thinking, maybe this is something I don't know. All we have to go on right now is what you see here. So if you describe something that doesn't fit into that, it's something that I will touch on in just a little bit as to how I would respond to that, or I would give you recommendations on what to do. But at this point, there's nothing more than what you see here with regards to what to notify on. So let's keep going. When to notify. The notice to individuals and the report to the commissioner must be given in the prescribed form as soon as feasible after it is determined that a breach occurred. So, interesting thing about this one is I have had a few people, a surprising amount of people, after I go over this with them, they'll pull me aside and they'll say, Danny, okay, is that serious? Are you true? Is that true? Like, so soon as I find out, and like, why don't I just say I didn't find out for a while? Give myself more time. Like how, why don't I just lie about it, right? So they're pulling me aside, they're giving me an honest conversation about this. And so this is something you definitely do not want to do. You definitely do not want to lie about this, okay? Because lying about this, they have so many different ways that they can determine if you lied. There's so many different ways that you can do some sort of forensics assessment that will find out exactly when you knew. And when you lie about it, that's when the real trouble happens, okay? I'll give you an example with Uber. Back in 2015, Uber had a breach. And the initial breach, what they ended up paying to the hackers, I think it was $100,000, right? That sounds about right, I think. And so they did not notify anyone like they should have, okay? They kept it quiet, and eventually that came out through something else. It came out by accident. The fine was over $148 million, okay? Think about it. What the hackers stole from them, cheers, was $100,000. But what their fine was $100 million. It was over $100 million, okay? What's interesting, what I've noticed about the government is when you do that wrong, when you get mandatory compliance wrong, the fines are devastating. And what will most likely happen is you're most likely not going to get a random audit. I don't see those. I think those are very rare where the government knocks on your door and says, hey, I'm here to do a random mandatory compliance audit. Usually when it comes out is it comes out as a result of something else, some kind of breach, some kind of hack, and somehow the news comes out and they prove that your failure to comply with what you should have complied. Then you get that call that you don't want to get. And at the worst time you're going through a horrible time with regards to your breach, you get a phone call and you're like, oh, hey, it's the government calling to help me out. That's awesome. And they're like, no, we're not. We're actually calling to find the hell out of you, okay? And then you're in really big trouble. So let's keep going. How to notify the commissioner. Now, if anyone here is familiar with GDPR, you'll actually see that this is actually quite similar with regards to how to notify. Similar information that you have to store, similar information that you have to send out, okay?
Danny, for those in the room who don't know what GDPR is?
General Data Protection Regulation. This is something that came into effect on May this year for organizations that do business with Europe. Similar to PIPA, okay? I think with much sharper teeth than PIPA, though, right? You definitely don't want to get GDPR wrong, okay? You don't want to get any of them wrong, but especially not GDPR. You will go under, I think. I don't know how you could recover from something like that, right? So let's go over this. So what is in the how? The circumstances of the breach and, if known, the cause. That makes sense, right? Something good to have regardless of if you have to or not. The date or period during which the breach occurred. The personal information that is the subject of the breach, an estimate of the number of individuals at real risk of significant harm. So we talked about that a couple slides back. The steps that the organization has taken to reduce risk or mitigate harm to individuals. The steps that the organization has taken or intends to take to notify affected individuals, and the name and contact information of a person who could answer on behalf of the organization the commissioner's questions about the breach. Because yes, the commissioner or one of their people will be contacting you, okay? Now this is all actually, regardless of law, regardless of regulation, this is something that organizations should be doing anyways. This is all really good information. Now, it's the same information that would go to the commissioner, the same information that you would want to send to your affected individuals, your clients, minus this last part here. You don't have to give that to the infected individuals, okay? So how do you reach out to the affected individuals? So there's two ways. The one way is direct notification. So direct notification, we're talking about by email, by letter, by telephone, or in person. My favorite, I do prefer email. If we're doing this so that we don't get in trouble, you want to be able to have a way that proves that you actually did it. If you have the conversation in person, unless you get them to sign something, understanding that they've done this, I don't like that. I do prefer something that has some sort of way that I can prove, nope, this is what I did, here's the time, here's the date, and you could see how fast it took me to do this, okay? Let's talk about indirect notification. There are some times where you actually won't do it directly. You won't have to do it directly. One is the giving of direct notification would cause further harm to the affected individual. If you have a scenario like that, you don't actually have to reach out to them directly. Now, the last session that I was at, somebody did ask me the question, when would that ever be a situation where notifying somebody about a breach, how could that possibly give somebody further harm? And there is actually one example, which is the sole reason that only exists, that line only exists because of one breach that happened, I think about a few years back, and it's a breach that is often met with giggles whenever I talk about it. Can anyone guess what I'm thinking? No, I'm actually referring to Ashley Madison, right? So Ashley Madison, you know, you imagine sending somebody a letter at home, and it's like, oh, your Ashley Madison account has been hacked, and it's like, what the hell, right? That's going to cause further harm. And if that's the case, if you have that kind of organization, it's cool. You don't have to do it directly, right? The cost of giving direct notification is prohibited for the organization. So if you have something where you have so many people, like a retail store, and you just have millions and millions of customers, and you're like, you know, I won't be able to do this. The cost is going to be too high. You don't have to do it directly either. And on that same note, the organization might not have contact information for the affected individual, or the information that they have is out of date. Again, you don't have to do it directly. So how do you do it indirectly? Indirect notification may be given either by a message posted on the organization's website for at least 90 days, or some sort of advertisement. And you know what? Depending on the size of company, yeah, this might be something that you might want to hire an advertiser for to make it sound better than it is, right? But again, that depends on your size, okay? So let's talk about record keeping. Now, this is the last piece in the PIPA session. This is where things get a bit interesting and maybe a little bit complicated. Early on, and I'll just also stop myself. I see there are some folks here that have been taking notes. If there's anything that you miss at any point, we'll make sure you get your hands on these slides, so don't worry about it if you miss something, okay? And we're recording it, and you'll have access to the video. There you just don't open the file. Don't open an email from anybody anymore. That's the So this part is where it gets a little complicated, because a couple slides back, I was talking so much about, hey, significant harm, real risk. If it doesn't fall into that, I think you're going to be okay. But now there's a portion that says organizations must maintain a record of every breach of security safeguards. So this is regardless of real risk or significant harm. We're talking every breach for a minimum of 24 months after the day on which the organization determines that the breach has occurred. So now it's like, well, wait a second. I thought we just had to do this in certain circumstances. Nope, you have to keep that record for everything. Upon request, organizations must provide the commissioner with such records. The commissioner may publish information from such records if it would deem in the public interest. So again, you might think, hey, this didn't fall under the category where I needed to notify people. It's cool. I'm going to keep it quiet. Commissioner comes along. Daniel comes along, and he's like, yeah, no, we got to tell people about this. And they're telling people about this, and they're getting in front of the story, not you. Now you've got a problem. Okay? The commissioner may also launch an investigation or audit based on the information in the breach file. Now this one's a pain. This one's a tough one to swallow, because what you put in there has to be honest. It has to be accurate, or you're going to get in trouble. But what you put in there could very well also get you in trouble. It's not unlike, when a cop is reading you the rights and they're like, whatever you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, right? This is what this is. The difference is, I suppose at least you can lie to a police officer. You don't want to lie on this, because the fines you don't want to do that. The record must contain any information pertaining to the breach that enables the commissioner to verify compliance. So when Daniel's wondering, hey, how come you didn't notify people about this? They want to look in the file. You need to have proof that says, this is why I didn't notify. I'm keeping the record because you want me to keep the record, but I didn't need to notify people because it didn't fall under those things. And these are the steps that we did to make sure that we didn't do it, right? Daniel needs enough information. The privacy commissioner needs enough information to make sure that that is legit. The commissioner must also be able to validate whether the organization noted and reported breaches as required in each case. And of course, again, that goes back to the point that I made before. They want to make sure that we are doing our jobs. Now, I want to just recap something that I said right before I dove into PIPA, and that is, what's interesting is, so this is it. This is what I went over with regards to PIPA. That's all that PIPA is, really. But what's interesting is, you'll notice I didn't say anything about what you need to do to protect your clients. None of that has been changed. None of that has been updated. All that it's talked about is what you need to do when you're already breached. And I think this is something that maybe sometimes organizations, people, sometimes we need to remind ourselves, like, yeah, we are living in a time where people aren't even talking about prevention anymore. They're just assuming it's going to happen, and they're saying, hey, what's your plan? So if we don't have a plan, this is something that's pretty scary. So I want to, and by the way, just before I keep going, Jamie, how am I doing for time? Am I okay? Perfect. I only need 40. So sometimes, after I give my explanation about why cybersecurity is such a complicated industry, people will still then say to me, okay, it's complicated. You talk a lot about response. You talk about how, prevention is not good enough. But I don't get it, Danny. Why can't we just do this in such a way that we can prevent a breach? Like, why can't we improve it, even with all those things that you listed? So I thought, you know what? What I started doing was I started giving people sort of an old-fashioned look at what a hacker's mindset is. Let's break down an attack, and I'll give you a very simple explanation. Before I do that, though, I want to define kind of an old term, right? Advanced targeted threats. something that, a term that was thrown around quite a bit, I think back in 2012, 2013. We've stopped using the term, but the way the attack is made is very relevant. And I want to describe that, and then I want to play out a scenario, okay? So when we talk about advanced and targeted threat, what I'm talking about for the advanced portion of it is, yeah, we could be talking about advanced technologies. I think that the real thing to consider is advanced social engineering tactics. The way these guys talk, the way these guys lie, spy, research, that's the thing that's really going to get you. That's what you got to watch out for. When we talk about targeted, I think we've heard enough that businesses can get targeted, but it's not even just businesses. It's specific people at businesses that get targeted. And I'm going to talk about how dangerous that can be in the next slide. And threat. The real threat is these guys are getting paid to do this. They are getting paid to do this. It is their job. It is what they care about. And anytime someone's full-time job is to take you down, man, that becomes really tricky to defend against, right? Because our job is not, my job as an individual of a company is not simply to protect myself, is not simply to protect my company. My job is a slew of other things. It's most along the lines of making sure the customers are happy. That's really our job as a business, right? Their job is not that. Their job is to make sure they take you down, okay? So let me describe a scenario here, and I'm just going to talk through it. We won't read that, and I'll simplify what you see on the slides. So let's say I'm a hacker, and I'll even make it tougher on this hacker. Let's say I'm a hacker in the days prior to LinkedIn being so big. Let's say I'm kind of an old-fashioned hacker, okay? And I do a little research on a company that I would like to poke around, that I'd like to have as a target. And I think to myself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to find out who are some targeted folks that I could zero in on at that company. So again, I'm an old-fashioned hacker. I'm not going to use LinkedIn. I'm going to make it more challenging on myself. But I call the front desk, okay? And I call the front desk, and I have a list of titles that I'm interested in that I think could give me the access that I want. And I might say, hi, I was in your Toronto location just the other day, and I was talking to one of the executives there. They told me to call them back. Oh, wouldn't you know it? I lost their number. Can you please give me some names? I just need their names. Can you please give me some names of some of the executives? So what's the person going to do? Yeah, sure. Was it so-and-so? Was it so-and-so? And by the way, this is a tactic used a lot by headhunters. I remember back 2001, I had a job. Somebody had called me. They're like, oh, I was talking to one of your executive sales reps, security specialists out in Toronto. Who was it? I lost their name. And I'm listing was it so-and-so? Was it so-and-so? Was it so? This guy's taking notes. All he wanted was names. And then one of them calls me, and they're like, yeah, Danny, you sent a headhunter my way. And I was like, oh, wow, he scammed me, right? So what I would do at that point is, I'm just taking notes. I'm just taking notes of names of people of particular interest. And nowadays, you wouldn't even have to call anyone. Nowadays, it'd actually be a lot easier. You could just type in a company name on LinkedIn. You can find people's names and their titles all off of LinkedIn without ever having to even call anyone. But let's say I get Dave Millier's name, okay? So I get Dave Millier's name, and exactly, right? So I get Dave's name, and I think, you know what? I'm going to Google Dave's name, and I'm going to try to find out what I could know about him. I'm just looking for anything that I can. And maybe I come across Dave on Facebook. And Dave now, he knows about security. He knows a thing or two about security. We'll say you're not an analyst, but we'll just say that you're an above-average, regular, non-Dave Millier type guy, okay? And so so he knows enough. He's above average. He knows enough that he's locked his Facebook account. He's made his Facebook account private, okay? But what most people don't realize is it's actually a separate locking mechanism to lock down your friends list, okay? So you can lock down your accounts. I might not be able to see anything about him, but I could see who his friends are. So as I'm going through his friends list, I see Jazz on there, okay? I see her name, and I see her picture, just Jazz. And that's all I need to see. So what I do is I pull an image of her picture, and I create another Facebook account, and with her name, her picture, everything. And so I then send Dave a friend request as Jazz. So Dave sees this, and he's thinking, I thought we were already friends. But what the hell? People sometimes unfriend and friend, whatever. He doesn't think anything of it. And he accepts her. Now, most people, they won't validate their friends list. Most people don't say, you know what, I'm going to check my friends list. I want to make sure the same name doesn't show up twice, right? I mean, why would you think to do that, right? And so now he's got Jazz appearing twice. One is the real Jazz. One is maybe me, the hacker, okay? Now, at that point, I could now learn about Dave. I could learn what his interests are, what his likes are, what his dislikes are. I could learn the name of his relatives, okay? I could learn whether or not he's married. And I could send him a message from a seemingly trusted source, and I could talk about things that I know he's familiar with, because it's all available on Facebook. And now all of a sudden, I've got a really powerful way to trick him into doing something that he shouldn't do. Okay? There are stats that range on phishing attacks from 3% to 45%, depending on who's doing the study, I see different stats coming from different places. So the success rate of a phishing attack is from 3 to 45%. But in a social network, okay, when you do a phishing attack like the one that I described, the success rate is 85%. Okay? Why would I say no to somebody? Somebody starts talking to me. There's someone I know, the face I trust, the name I trust, and they know things about me. Now, sometimes when I do the story, I go to take them past the social engineering part. I talk about installing an exploit. I talk about calling down a command and control. I'm going to skip all of that. Because what you do after that, what the hacker decides to do after that, it's almost irrelevant. The damage at this point is done. I'm in, and I'm talking to somebody that trusts me, and I know information about them. If I want to do a ransomware attack, if I want to get them to reveal information, I could do any number of things. At that point, the attack doesn't matter. And that, by the way, is sometimes what I don't like when I'll sit in on a security session and it's all about ransomware. Yes, ransomware is on the news. It's very popular right now. But it's not the most dangerous thing. If I could wave a magic wand and if I could eliminate ransomware from existing anywhere, these guys, once they're past that social engineering stage, they'll just use something else. They don't care. It doesn't have to be ransomware, right? So this, by the way, if you're ever wondering, well, why can't we just prevent it? This is why we can't prevent it. When someone is coming after us and they are that motivated and zeroing in on us specifically, it becomes very difficult to defend against, okay? Now, one of the things that I hear most often when I talk about this is sometimes I'll meet organizations and I'll talk about this and they'll be like, okay, phew, that's reassuring. And I'm like, sorry? I'm like, I was trying to scare you. How did I reassure you just now? And they're like, well, you talk about being targeted. We're a small business. Nobody's talking to us. Small to medium business, we're safe. So, Danny, thanks. Glad you came out here. I feel much better, okay? But here's the thing. That is something that I hear so often, the line, who would attack me? That is a line that I've been hearing for years now and still hearing now, surprisingly, even with all the news out there, okay? But I want to talk about, for one, I'll say that couldn't be more wrong. And the other thing is, I'll talk about how a hacker goes about deciding who they're going to target. They look at it the same way a business will look at it. So they'll look at their target list. And they'll look at their target list and they'll divide it primarily in threes. They'll look at it as one piece, hacking an individual. Maybe I don't care where you work. Maybe I just want to hack you, hack your bank, hack your credit card, and I'm just working on an individual. There's enterprise organizations. I'm going to go after a really big enterprise organization. Or there's the SMB, small to medium business market. By far, the most targeted is the SMB. And why? Simply because they have more money than an individual, but way less cybersecurity than an enterprise. So for the very reason when people are saying, why would anyone come after me? It's that very reason as to why people are coming after you. And it's not entirely their fault. I know that the media never talks about it. And I know anytime I've ever pitched a story to Global about the SMB, it always gets rejected. The stories they love are stories of individuals getting hacked. When you say, hey, keeping your kids safe for the Christmas holidays online, they love that. They all want to talk to you about that. People can relate to that. When you say, hey, that big bank got taken down, let me come in, let me talk about that. Sure, everybody knows that name. But when you say, I want to talk about an SMB, like, sorry, Danny, like, no one can relate to this, nobody cares. The media doesn't talk about it, and because they don't talk about it, people feel that they're safe. Now, not only are they higher on the target list, but they're considerably higher on the impact list, okay? 60% of small to medium businesses that are hit with a cyber breach go out of business within 6 months after the attack. Are you kidding me? 60%, that's more than half. And in less than a year, they're done. They go out of business, right? And that's also the sad part. You know, we heard the story about Target Retail, old story, talked to death about by security guys. We also all heard how it happened. We heard how the hackers piggybacked through the HVAC company, and they used that, and they took down Target. We heard, maybe we didn't hear, but we heard about how their CEO was let go, and the hack had something to do with it, right? But you know what? That CEO, they're still rich. I can guarantee you that CEO is still rich, and Target is still here. That HVAC company, which people only refer to as that HVAC company because nobody knows their name, they're out of business. They're out of business because word got out. These are the guys that took down Target, right? Not only that, but a slew of other problems that came their way as a result of that. Nobody talks about that. That's devastating. Yeah, Target, they'll be fine, right? That CEO that got fired, they'll be fine, okay? But it's the small guys that suffer the most, and they're the ones, unfortunately, that don't realize they're actually being targeted the most. And the last point that I'll have with regards to this is a quote from FBI Director Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller, we probably all heard his name on the news quite a bit as a result of the Donald Trump investigation. What I like about quoting from the FBI is they're not here to sell anything. They're just here to educate, and they're just here to talk about security. But let's take, what is he saying about business? I am convinced that there are only two types of companies: those that have been hacked and those that will be. And by the way, if we were to stop the quote right there, wow, what a powerful quote. But it actually goes on. He goes on to say, and even they are converging into one category: companies that have been hacked and will be hacked again. And by the way, I didn't cut this short. He doesn't go on to say after, unless you're in the SMB, in which case you're totally safe, right? He's talking about all companies, right? And when I was working with the FBI, I'd ask them, guys, why do you care about, like, you know, got the big quote from the big chief, from Robert over there. Why do you guys talk about businesses getting hacked? I'm like, that would fall under local jurisdiction. If I'm a business, I get hacked, I would call the cops depending on where I'm located. I'm like, why do you care so much about it? And they said, yep, in part you are right, but they're like, but the crimes that are being perpetrated from here, that's helping fund the dark web. That's helping fund far greater crimes that do become our jurisdiction and that are our problem. So this is something that we want to be vocal about, and we want to make sure businesses know just how serious this is. So we talked about how we got to know how to respond. We talked about SMB. These guys are being targeted. We talked about how the impact is very severe. I want to touch a little bit on cyber insurance. Cyber insurance is not, I'm not an insurance broker. I'm not an insurance agent. I do not sell cyber insurance, but I do like talking about it, okay? I came across cyber insurance back in 2014. I was with a company, and I went out to a client. They'd suffered a breach. They were asking for our help, and the client had lost, there was a mid-market client. They lost $2 million. And I'm thinking to myself, just statistically speaking, with the amount of money that were taken by the hackers and your size, you're probably going to be going out of business in 6 months or so, or less, right? And they're panicking, they're freaking out. But it turns out, they're like, oh, we have something called cyber insurance. I didn't know what cyber insurance was, right? I've been in security my whole adult life, never heard of this, right? And they're like, I think we'll be okay. And they were. They got that money back. And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, holy cow, I'm telling people, worry about you, respond. How are you going to respond? I've been preaching about response for the longest time. Meanwhile, there's something like this exists. I got to start talking about this, okay? I'll tell you what I like about it, okay? So now, cyber insurance at this point is not regulated. Not all policies will look the same, but there are 7 things that are fairly common that you may see, or something you should at least ask for if this is something that you're considering. One is covering fines and penalties. Well, I spent a lot of time talking about fines and penalties, and I talked about mandatory regulation. So if we could get something like that covered, wow, that would really help in the event of a breach. Legal fees. You get breached. Chances are someone's going to sue you, or you're going to sue someone, or maybe something else, but you want to talk to a lawyer. Absolutely. Okay? PR fees. You know, I talked about sending direct notification. Wouldn't it be great if you could actually run that by a PR company saying, listen, we were breached. We got to notify our clients. Can you help us write this email, right? I mean, well, we rarely talk about that in the security world, but PR would be a big part of that plan, okay? Forensics. This is something that almost definitely will be covered on just about any cyber insurance contract because they're going to want to know that you didn't steal from yourself. And, we're going to do a forensics assessment. We're going to make sure you didn't steal your own $2 million and now are double dipping, right? Identity theft restoration services or restoration services for lost or stolen data or, of course, extortion resolution services from ransomware. Now, all great things to have some support on when you need it most. But what I also like to do whenever I explain this to someone is I like to go back and say, now let's forget for a second that I'm talking about cyber insurance. And let me ask you, do you know how you're doing with regards to the mandatory regulation that is applicable to you? Are you on top of that? Do you know who you would call for legal services? Do you know a law firm that specializes in cybersecurity? Like, who would be your phone call in the event of a breach? What about PR services? Do you know any companies that you feel comfortable with, that you've done some work? Who are you calling when that happens? What about forensic services, identity theft restoration services? Who are you going to call if you get hit with ransomware? Have you thought about this? And I love encouraging organizations. Yes? Yeah.
Cyber insurance. Is this Canadian? Are you aware of Canadian companies that offer this?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You got Dave Millier actually works very closely with a bunch of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've just had
We get called by the insurance companies when people get breached. Quick Intelligence is a response company. We do forensic services. We actually work with insurance companies, so in the event of a breach, we've been called.
So you don't go to Allstate or anything like that?
They do.
It depends. You're in good hands with Allstate. Hey-oh! Well done. Well done. So what I like to tell people is one, look at this in two ways. One, ask yourself, hey, do we have cyber insurance? Find out if you do, and find out what's covered. Do they have these 7 things on there? Find out, is it right for you? Outside of cyber insurance, ask yourself, do we got a phone number at the very least for all of these things? And if we do have a phone number, that's a good place to start. But have we at least contacted them to have the conversation? I'm not saying go run out and spend a bunch of money on all of these things, but maybe at least start to know who these people are, start the dialogue now, so when something does happen, you're ready and you know how to move. If not when, exactly. Well said.
One other question. Did they actually give you not evaluation, those things you could fill out to identify if you a questionnaire where you sit to make sure that you're even
Some of them do, most of them don't. No.
most of them don't. Okay, that's interesting.
Excellent question. It's like, it's all done differently. I think, Dave, you were telling the story. You had 3 different cyber insurance contracts, all collecting information from you in vastly different ways, and some not at all.
And I review them for customers quite a bit. You read the policies, and again, I mean, the policy helps out with a lot of those things, but what it doesn't do typically is actually help you to respond. So it's there to help you recover, right? So that's why Danny's saying you still need to know, you still need to have somebody. Some of the insurance companies, they'll sell you this concept of a cyber insurance or a cyber breach coach, or breach coach. Oh, call us and we'll hook you up with this guy. And well, the challenge is getting people and its availability and all those things. And so what ends up happening a lot of times is you have to go out yourself. You have to engage those people, or you've already got them. And what the insurance is there is to help you recover financially after you've spent the money. I had to engage a Quick Intelligence to come and help us do the forensic investigation. I had to spend $35,000 because we took a chance that we'd get the key back from the ransomware, and thank goodness we did. But the insurance will actually protect you for that. It'll
So
cover it.
reactive in most cases.
It's all, in my experience, it's very reactive. The insurance companies aren't equipped to, they don't have teams of guys sitting there with black helicopters ready to fly in and drop guys off at your office. So
Well, I'll touch that up in a way to make it really easy to understand. Think about it of what you know about insurance, right? So my home got broken into last year. The door was damaged as they made their way in. Yeah, I got that covered, right? But I'm still the one that's calling to get the door replaced. I still have to get it replaced, right? The insurance is going to cut me the check, which is great, but they're not going to do it for me. This is no different, right? It's just like regular insurance, except it's cyber. Yeah.
It's not an instead of. I never think of insurance. It's very much an as well as. You can't say. We had one story where we met with with a CIO. I won't mention names, but we met with a CIO, and I asked him, how he felt, how comfortable he was to be ready to respond to a breach, and he said, "Well, a lot better this week than I was last week, or something." I said, "Oh, really? Why?" And he said, "Oh, I bought cyber insurance." And they were equating that to somehow that had reduced their risk, and it didn't reduce their risk. It's another tool to help you manage risk.
Well, that's like saying, hey, I got car insurance, so I guess I don't need my seatbelt, and I guess I can drive drunk. It's fine. It's all insured, right? You know, I live in Canada. Healthcare is free, right? So I don't need to watch when I cross the street. There's that. Yeah. There's that episode on The Simpsons where the Simpsons visit Canada and Bart's crossing the street and like, look both ways. He goes, don't worry, healthcare is free here, so it's fine, right? It's always, just like our policies in non-cyber life and our regular real life, it's the same thing with cyber, right? It is definitely something that will help the blow when you get a check back. That's really nice. But it alone is not going to help you, okay? Not if you go out of business. Now, really quickly, what it might not cover, or most likely won't cover, is it really comes from the same point, but I've listed it as two, and that is if it's a disgruntled former or current employee or an angry vendor, okay? So the reason why that is insurance will insure business as a single entity. So if it sees the business intentionally attacking itself, they'll say, well, you're doing this. You're attacking yourself. You're double dipping. I'm not going to pay you for this. Like if I burn my house down and I say, hey, I burned my house down. I needed some money. You guys got to pay me now, right? They're like, yeah, Danny, it doesn't count if you've done this yourself, okay? Now, some people will say to me, well, what the hell? That's the only reason I got the insurance was because I'm worried about an angry vendor. I'm worried about angry employees, okay? So for that, I say, well, keep two things in mind. One, be sure you're aware of what your insurance policy may not cover. If this is a problem for you, you've got to bring that up. And remember, anything can be insured. If you need that covered, you can have that discussion. You can get that covered, right? But it's something that you need to be aware of. David Beckham has his legs insured. Anything can be insured with the right conversation, with the right negotiation. But I would hate for an organization to have coverage and to think that they're covered for this and only find out that they're not covered after when it's too late. So that's what I always encourage people, right? Find out what the situation is, and not only that, but ask yourself, okay, well, if it's genuinely not covered and I do see the value and the importance of having cyber insurance, well, what am I doing to keep checks on potential threats from an angry vendor, or what am I doing to keep checks on potential threats from disgruntled former employees or current employees, okay? Something to consider, right? So let's keep going.
And just quickly, the other thing that think about here, which most people don't think about, is the third piece that's here, and we're seeing it in the States more, but I'm sure it's going to come here, is insurance companies not paying out because companies weren't prepared.
That too.
So the challenge that happens, the FCC is actually fining companies in the States who are having data breaches where the data gets stolen. They get a fine from the FCC, their customers sue them, and then on top of that, they say, well, thank God I bought that cyber insurance, and the insurance company's saying, we're not going to cover because you did absolutely nothing to be prepared for some type of a breach. You bought a firewall at, you bought this box at, Best Buy, whatever, that said firewall on it, you plugged it in, and you somehow thought that was protecting your network. You have no policies, you have no process, yet you have no understanding of what's on your network. And so people are actually being, and we're seeing it from the States, and I guarantee it will come to Canada.
Well, compliance is not a check mark, right?
Yeah, so it's not, your insurance company will use that or can use that as the third reason there, really, which is you weren't prepared. And so it doesn't matter if you bought the insurance, if you're not prepared and it's clear that you're negligent and the breach happened as a result of your negligence. It's like not locking your door when somebody broke in.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. And we love our friends in insurance. We've had dinners with some of these guys. We've had friends with these guys. We love them. But that if they can get away with not paying, they won't pay you. That's what they need to do. That's their job. Yeah. That's their business. So I do highly encourage talking to your broker. I do highly encourage looking this if anybody doesn't have it, right? Take a look at it. But I also highly encourage talking to a cybersecurity specialist team to make sure you're talking to both teams, okay? Why is that? Organizations must now, more than ever, ensure that they have in place internal safeguards, policies, and procedures to adequately detect, escalate, and respond to privacy incidents. This is the world that we're living. What was that? No, not at all, not at all. So I think you'll like this slide as well, Dave. I took it right from your website, so I think you'll appreciate that. So let's wrap up here. This is my last slide. Let's wrap up and let's talk about how to prepare. So one of the ways to prepare is information gathering, okay? One of the things that I love telling people is when I meet with an organization, I'll ask them, do you guys know, do your employees know how to even determine what is considered sensitive information? There's the obvious stuff, right? You know, you work for KFC, you got access to the secret recipe, right? Sure. You know, it's actually, yeah, they've been lying to us all this time. They added an extra herb and spice. Sure. So some things are pretty obvious, but for many organizations, there are actually things that are actually quite sensitive, but maybe not that obvious. Have you had your conversation with the employees to let them know this is how you determine what is considered sensitive information? Now, once you know how to classify what is sensitive information, do you know where it is? Where do we keep this sensitive information? And further to that, do you know who has access to this sensitive information? These are all things that need to be determined. This is all information that needs to be gathered, okay? You also want to look at a response process, right? So what you want to do is you want to review the current response. So what do we do when something like this was to happen? Do we have anything written down? Do we know who would be called as a part of our response team internally? Who are the people? Is it the CEO? Is it the CFO? Is it the CIO? Who are the names of the folks that are going to get that immediate call? Holy cow, something terrible happened. You guys are getting this call or this email. Where are they going to meet? What room are they meeting, and where is the actual room located? Something as simple as that really should be thought out. If something like this happens, we're going to be jumping on this call, we're going to be meeting in this room, and we're going to plan from there. After that, do you know if you have cyber insurance? Who's calling the insurance broker to find out of that coverage? And if you have it, further to that, do you know what it actually covers you for? I asked that question. I've been asking that question for years. Do you have cyber insurance? And anytime I hear someone say, yes, I do, I've noticed it's certainly been an increase over the years. 2 years back, 3 years back, not many people had it. More people are having it. So that's what I consider the first phase. But then when I say, so do you know what it covers you for? When I ask my second phase question, that's when I'm like, no idea. I mean, do you know what maybe is not covered? No idea, right? So that's what I encourage people to do. And then I also encourage looking at that information. Who would I call for PR? Who would I call for legal? Who would I call for forensics? Who would I call for other security such professional services? Do you know who you're working with? Have you had those conversations? Familiarization. So when you call these companies, they're going to ask you a bunch of questions. And all that talk that they need to do to research that information, that really does kind of slow things down. Wouldn't it be great if you had that conversation with them prior to that happening? That way, when it does actually happen, you could say, I know what they're going to ask me because we've talked about this 3 months ago when there was nothing wrong. Now that I'm calling them and I'm going to be hiring them, something is wrong, but we're already set because I know how to prepare for this. It would be that much faster. And during the worst moments when your business is under attack, you definitely don't want to do anything else that might actually slow you down. A better understanding of what a breach might look like so you know when to engage outside assistance. So when would I call a security professional services company? When would I call a PR firm, a lawyer? When would I reach out? Can I answer any of these questions? Not that hard to do once you've actually spent some time figuring it out, okay? And then, of course, a response and escalation process, building out initial notification and escalation processes. Find out what from PIPA is applicable to you and find out how you would go about doing that should something like that happen and should you guys actually need to pull something like that off. And that's it for me, guys. I covered a lot of information here. I think what I want to leave you guys with is I want to leave you with the understanding of a few things. One, when we talk about security strategy, if I was to summarize that in 3 words, I would talk about prevention, detection, and response. And I would say that we've really, for the most part, evolved our understanding that we know we need to be able to respond to this quite well. It's really all about the response because they just keep happening, right? That's what our government's telling us, and that's what we keep seeing. So ask yourselves, are we ready to respond? Have we looked at the things that I've uncovered in this presentation? And are you ready for it, right? A couple of last things I'll leave you with is my name, Danny Pehar. You've seen the spelling on the invite list. If you want to talk to me, please send me an invite on LinkedIn. Let's be friends. And after me, Dave Millier is going to talk. And when I said I got this from his site, I wasn't kidding. I did get this from their site. This is, in part, how they do their breach response service.